Hi, this is Peter Woolfolk speaking. Now, first of all, thank you so very much for listening to the podcast. Now, I am very excited to let you know that the podcast is now available on Amazon Alexa. You know the drill. Simply say, Alexa, play Public Relations Review Podcast, and she'll take it from there. And again, thank you for listening. And if you enjoy the program, please become a subscriber. Now, on to the podcast.
Welcome. This is the Public Relations Review Podcast, a program to discuss the many facets of public relations with seasoned professionals, educators, authors, and others. Now, here is your host, Peter Woolfolk.
Welcome to the Public Relations Review Podcast and to our listeners all across America and around the world. With the presidential campaign underway, I began to think about how my hands-on experience in a campaign of this magnitude prepared me for advancing to senior levels in the public relations world. That in turn sparked the idea to identify other professionals that have had a similar experience. And then we could discuss what were some of those major learning experiences and how they prepared us to advance in the public relations industry. So joining me today are two people who have had that experience, and I will also join in. Starting us off will be Adrienne Grimes. She is currently the South Carolina Research Authority's new Director of Marketing and Communications, and she joins us today from Summerville, South Carolina. Prior to that, she headed the External Affairs and Marketing Communications for the South Carolina Telehealth Alliance and the Medical University of South Carolina Center for Telehealth. She also served on the Board of Directors for Carolina's Healthcare Public Relations and Marketing Society and on the Business and Financial Subcommittee of the American Telemedicine Association. However, for purposes of this broadcast today, she managed all of the South Carolina communications for the former U.S. Representative Newt Gingrich's presidential campaign. Next up is Norris Clark. He is the managing partner of Princeton Strategic Communications and joins us today from Trenton, New Jersey. Prior to that, he owned Bayshore Communications, and he was also deputy mayor of the township of Lohr, which is Cape May's largest municipality. Add to that, he was the deputy of the Family and Communications Relations Office in New Jersey's Department of Education, and he also was a vice president with Magnet Communications. However, it was while he was with Perot Systems in Plano, Texas, that he was recruited by Ross Perot to manage the introduction of some of their new offerings. As a result, Norris was tapped to serve as the state director and spokesperson for Ross Perot's presidential campaign. Now, part of my background, and I'll be very quick about this, and I'll just pick it up, is the fact that I've also became, after having some TV and radio experience, I became a communications manager at the National Education Association in Washington, D.C., which is my hometown. Later, I became the press secretary for the chairman of the U.S. Congress Committee on Education and Labor, and later worked for two other senior members of Congress. So that went into the Clinton and Gore's second campaign, where I was the Delaware press secretary. After that ended, I came back to D.C. to be one of the press secretaries for the Presidential Inaugural Committee, and then into the Clinton administration as Special Assistant for Communications for Assistant Secretary of Education. With all that said, let me welcome Adrienne and Norris to the podcast.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Adrienne, why don't you, let's say ladies first, why don't you let us hear from you about some of the experiences that you had in Newt Gingrich's campaign and how that benefited you?
Okay, sure. That was an exciting time. I was self-employed doing marketing communications for a number of political candidates, which is how I ended up with this contract. You know, they share their vendors, so I worked on two congressional campaigns, and one of the candidates said, hey, I think you'd be great for this. I said, I'm not sure. Don't know that I agree with everything he says and does, and he said it doesn't matter. I remember, and he's still in Washington, his line to me was red state, blue state, green money. And so with that, I jumped in. It was a wonderful experience. I will never regret it. I learned a lot. what I did remember, I started off in television news, and you know how hectic a newsroom is. But after leaving TV news, I kind of gotten away from the franticness of writing. But certainly working with this presidential campaign, all of that came back. The franticness of writing, I call it writing on the fly, when you're preparing statements and the candidate is out giving interviews. I remembered how to write on the fly and pivot pretty quickly. Speaker Gingrich was all over South Carolina. He was in hospitals. He was in workplaces. He was talking to the media. His wife was with him a lot. And so, we had the prep calls every morning. But as the day went along, you were constantly writing and changing what you said and resubmitting things to the campaign director. And sometimes he was accepting it. Sometimes he was saying no. But it was really a lot of writing on the fly that I honed really well with that campaign. And then also working with the events. We've all done events, but presidential campaign events are a whole nother level because you're working with advanced team security and the media all at the same time. So working with a lot of logistics. And I'd never worked with advanced teams who wanted to know a day ahead, what you were going to say and how are you going to say it and where was he going to stand when you said it because of security. So that was fascinating. And then lastly, I will say I learned how to really participate in social media listening. We all respond to social media and manage social media, but the social media listening is a whole different animal because you're literally listening to what people are saying online, how they're saying it, and then trying to craft your message to respond to those things.
Well, that's great. Norris, how about you?
Well, Peter, I need to tell you the story of how a school teacher ended up on Ross Perot's campaign. And here's what happened. I was sitting on my sofa at home, minding my own business, and my wife was watching Larry King Live. And I was running a school and teaching at the community college level, and I was teaching American government. It's one of the things I was teaching. But my wife saw Ross Perot on Larry King Live, and she literally jumped off the sofa. She ran over to the phone. She dialed some number in Dallas, and then she handed me the phone, and she said, "Norris, do something about the national debt." And I gave my name, and the next thing I knew, there was a line of people outside my door. We organized our community together. This, of course, was the most unorthodox political campaign in the history of America, I suspect. And so, Ross dropped out, got back in. I mean, it was really a lot of drama going on with this campaign, but he ended up with nearly 20% of the vote. After the election in 92, he formed an organization called United We Stand America, and this was really about, he had Newt Gingrich calling him, he had President Clinton calling him, and everybody was interested, about getting the Perot voters back in their camps, right? And so he set up United We Stand America. Over 2 million people sent in $20. And as this was organizing, I was elected to represent New Jersey to the national organization. And then when I get there, they said, out of the 50 state directors, we're going to elect 5 of you to be on the board of directors. So the next thing I knew, I didn't campaign for the job, but I guess that made me attractive. And I ended up sitting next to Ross Perot on a, over $40 million citizen action group. And after we incorporated, he gave us, and this is no lie, he said, "Norris, come with me." And I had about 3 minutes notice before we were placed on a dais in front of the entire national press corps. Every network, all C-SPAN, all there. And he got up and he said, much to my surprise, "Hi, my name is Ross Perot. I'm just the white albino monkey that came here to draw a crowd. This is not about me. I'm just incidental to this organization. So I'm going to turn this press conference over to these folks here who fought and died to build the organization from the ground up." And that's what he said. And he walked off the stage, sat in the front row. Now, I was standing there And my wife, tuning in on television, she's realizing that her husband has really gotten into the thick of it. And one of the first people to stand up and ask a question was Dan Baltz of the Washington Post, the political reporter. And the question was, what are you going to do about the national debt? What's your agenda? Now, again, I stress to you that this whole press conference and the fact that I was going to have to say anything was a surprise with about 3 minutes. But I had learned in my teaching days that you never know when people are going to ask you a question, and you always should be prepared to have an answer. And it helps if you have 3 points. And so, in the shower that morning before coming to the board meeting, I just said, well, what are we going to do about the net? What's the plan? And I wanted 3 points. So I think I started to organize some thoughts in my head. And so I don't remember what I said, but I had 3 points. And that opened the door to representing Ross Perot and his movement across America. And I ended up on CNN and debating Governor Jerry Brown in California and being interviewed by Newsweek and having my name, taken in vain by Rush Limbaugh on his national radio program. So that's the first lesson. And I've got several more I can share with you if you want in terms of what I learned after that first incident. As I got to know reporters, I was just dumb enough not to look at reporters as enemies, not to look at them as adversaries. And what I did was give them total respect for the job that they had. I know it was their job to get the story and to get it right. And I just made a lot of good relationships with major reporters because I really wanted to serve them as they were trying to get the story. And there's one time where they misquoted me. A national publication, I won't mention it, but they had me saying, they asked the question, do you think that the movement needs someone to transcend Ross Perot? Or does the movement transcend Ross Perot was the question. And I said, of course, it's bigger than one man. But it came out into the national press, and it came out like this. Norris Clark says that the movement needs someone who can transcend Ross Perot. So, it's a little bit different twist. But the point of that is I called up that reporter, and I said, that's not exactly what I said. And he went back and looked at his notes and said, you're right, and retracted it and rewrote it. And that taught me a lesson that I think we've lost in political discourse. We've now made it okay to denigrate the media as a class. And I think that's a terrible mistake. I think it's wrong. I don't think it's the civil thing to do. And that most reporters want to get it right. And if you respect them in their jobs, you got a lot better chance of getting your story out there accurately.
Well, I've listened to both of you, and we've all shared similar experiences. I'm looking here at some of my notes, and when we talk about managing major events, because part of I did have a little bit of an advance, I guess, in terms of having worked with some members of Congress, not necessarily the same thing, but some of the things that I got out of that was Congress passes a lot of bills and legislation, and there's a lot of information. Reporters want that information, but I found out from my point of view that I only need to know the high points of that legislation or the policy that they're talking about. If they need to go into the weeds about it, then I've got some people, the legislative folks that can go and get that done. But also respecting reporters, giving them everything they need to get the story. That was one of the things I learned quick on Capitol Hill. Here's the congressman, here's the data, what time you want to talk to them or meet with them. Here's the information, all the information you need. So absolutely right. But in terms of the election, when I was in Delaware, I had not dealt with large numbers of reporters because the vice president came up and the first lady came up, not at the same time, but similar. And now you're right. You're working with the advance team because they want to know everything, and you're also working with security all at one time. So, and if you can recall, particularly security, they asked very detailed questions. I mean, they want to know what route you're coming in, what door they're going to go, maybe how many steps, who's going to be on the stage with the person, what are they going to say, all of those kinds of things. So from my point of view, it taught me to think, forced me to think in more detail about stuff. Pool reporters, I've never dealt with a pool before, because most of the time, as PR people, we spend our time going after reporters to get something in the media. Politics, they're right there on you, asking you questions. So part of what I saw was learning to understand the intricacies, if you will, not all the details of the policies that are being discussed, the legislation that's being discussed, so that we could at least have some conversations with those reporters. And event planning, details are important. You know, I've never heard of anybody when, as I say, the dais or the riser for the media were going up and somebody said something about the throw. What's the throw for this? And I'm saying, what the hell are you talking about? And basically the throw is, what's the distance between the riser and the microphones? You know, so they can determine how long a cable they need to run. So, you know, all of those kinds of things. So that's some of the stuff I learned, not only how to manage those events and dealing with people, but thinking in terms of details that I carried over to working with other clients.
Yeah, you're correct talking about things these terms. What's a throw? Mine was what do you mean by wheels down, wheels up?
Yeah.
So, you know, they're flying from state to state, you know, sometimes in a day, and like, you know, Adrian, I need to know when's wheels up, and I'm like, well, his flight leaves. No, when's he wheels down, you know? So
yeah.
which is different from when does his flight land. It's when is he wheels down, because everybody on the plane can flick off of airplane mode, and so now they have connectivity. And that's wheels down, switch airplane, you know, you have connectivity on the plane. So there are things that you can do before they deboard the plane. And those are terms I'd literally never heard of. And this is 2012, so I'm not new in my career because I'm older, but, you know, I just had never heard those things. So those, you're right, there are things that are very specific to political and political campaigns and political communications. But I learned very quickly to understand wheels up, wheels down, and how that was different from what time the flight left and what time he was due in a particular city. So very detailed, as you said.
You know, Peter, probably the most important thing I learned throughout all the process of a campaign was the importance of telling a story. And I got the first tip on this it was from James Carville. I heard him talk about the three things that were most important to him as he led the campaign for President Clinton. He told President Clinton three things. Number one, you have to be relevant. And that, of course, is the economy stupid. Number two is that less is more. So he spent a lot of time taking things off of President Clinton's verbal plate and just made sure that what he said was precisely what needed to be said. But then it needed to be communicated in the form of a story. And I always remembered that. And then years later, I started studying the whole idea of what makes a good story. And, you know, all stories are the same. You know, as you've got a character or a set of characters whose lives get thrown out of balance by something that happens, some crisis comes into their life, and then they're trying to put things right again, their lives back into balance, and they're on this quest and journey to overcome all the obstacles that are out there as they put things right. And, you know, it's the basic format of a story, and we like to hear stories because stories help us to understand why things are happening. You know, if you want to explain to somebody why they should do something, you need to tell a story. There's only 4 ways that a presidential candidate can persuade people to go along with them. There are only 4 options. They can try to coerce them by scaring them. They can try to seduce them by telling them that they'll be winners if they vote for me. They can try to reason with them. Studies have shown that I'm the best candidate. Or they can tell a story in terms of people who that they can relate to and identify with and see themselves in their shoes, and then say, if I were in your shoes, I'd be doing the same thing. And then you sit back and watch, okay, let's see how this candidate is really going to get us to where we need to be. Mm-hmm. President Reagan was a great communicator because he told a story that explained why we should cooperate together in order to make a better America. And even though not everyone agreed with his policy, and they recognized that he was sincere about wanting to get America to be that city shining on a hill where all of us could be living together equally and in harmony. So telling a story turns out to be the most important way to communicate. It's far better than all the other options out there. And the last thing I want to say is that the beginning of every story is a crisis. And so communicators really have to embrace crisis, especially in a campaign. I mean, every day is a crisis, usually in a campaign. And people aren't going to judge you by being in a crisis, but they are going to judge you by how you respond to the crisis. And you need to come before people, and you can never win through spin. Spinning doesn't work. BS doesn't work. Pretty soon, people are going to cut through the BS, or they're going to cut through the spin, as we've seen today with our elected officials, and call them on account for not being straight with us. So, the importance of being authentic in telling your story is probably the most important lesson to be learned. But that includes embracing crisis. Don't running away from it. Every reporter is going to, if it bleeds, it leads, right? So if you have to embrace the crisis communications of a campaign, and not pretend like there's nothing to see here, and appreciate the fact that reporters are going to be looking. They're not going to believe everything we say. They're not going to just automatically trust us, and so you have to be prepared to prove what it is that you're saying and back it up.
Well, that's interesting, because when I hear that, I think about the fact that I was actually in the administration when the Monica Lewinsky thing broke, and the secretary called all the senior staff over there to say, okay, fine, just do what we do because it's out of our hands, and we'll just see what happens. So he finally, he being the president, finally had to fess up. I think more damage was done when he tried to cover it up than when he finally, said, okay, fine, I made a mistake. Let's move on. It took him a little while to get over that, but he remains perhaps one of the most popular presidents around. The other thing that I think about, particularly when I deal with political figures, is they don't like surprises. So that's why you need to come to them when you are involved in some project or event for them with all the information in place, all the details, all who, how, what, where, and when, so that when they ask these questions, you've got an answer for them. Because I think particularly in members of Congress or other public meetings, that they don't want somebody sticking their hand up and say, well, fine, I tried to reach you X number of times and nobody answered the phone, or nobody got back to me. So you need to plug all those holes in terms of how precise you are in your planning and attention to details, because when I came here to Nashville, I was surprised at how cavalier people were about events. They just assumed that everybody knew who was going to do what and when it was going to be done, and that's not the way I function. So details and information are very, very important to me. That's one of the key takeaways that I have from my experience.
Yeah.
And you're right. And as communicators, when both of you were speaking, protection kept coming to my mind. As their communicator, you're also protecting them. So it's talking about, filling the gaps and plugging the holes, and they don't like surprises. And so as you're writing for them, you are literally trying to anticipate, like you said, any question, anything that might come out of left field. Oh, Newt Gingrich was known for the Contract of America. That was back in the 90s. Now it's 2012. And, he's trying to broaden his base, and people are like, oh, what about that contract with America? And so you're trying to, write about him today, and you're trying to write for the day, but you're also having to remember, his record from before and trying to incorporate all those things. And in a primary, you're really just speaking to your base. So a little bit easier, and then, as you move from a primary to a general election, you're not so much speaking to the base, you're trying to broaden, so it requires a lot more work to broaden those communications from, tell the history and what he's known for, and which of those things he wants to still be known for, and which of those things he wants to appear that he's moved away from a little bit. So it is some intricate communications to sort of manage all of those things and protect the candidates so that they, aren't caught off guard. You're just almost playing devil's advocate, what could I get him with, and trying to anticipate those things and to cover your tracks. And I also wanted to speak a little bit more on the media relations. You're right. So much of PR is running after the media, but they do come after you, and they want to get to know you because they know you're working with this or that candidate. So, they want the story. They want to know where they're going to be every day, what they're going to be doing, what are they doing when they get there. And so I have been fortunate. That's another way this is prepared or helped my career. My media relations are pretty cool. Local, state, national, because there are people in my LinkedIn that I worked with in 2012 when I was doing this. And so I could still tap into some of those, national networks, not necessarily what I'm doing now in this field, but those connections are great because they'll say, oh, Adrian, I'll put you in touch with so-and-so because he's covering that. So the longstanding media relations is certainly a plus from having done this type of work.
Well, Peter, I was just going to say that of all the questions that they ask you, the one that I think is most important to have a ready answer for is why. Why are you doing what you're doing? And that speaks to your motivation. And people don't care what you know until they know why you care. And so it's so important to start with why I'm doing this, why I'm running, why I believe this policy is important, before you get to the how we're going to do something about it and what it's going to be. Most people say, I think we should have this policy and here's how we should do it. And they don't get around to really saying why. What's driving this? What's motivating us to be behind this? And I believe that's what people are most interested in hearing about when you're talking to them.
The other thing I think about, too, is particularly when I got in Congress and in the campaign was, all of a sudden now you're dealing with people at the highest levels, because depending upon maybe what party you are, where you are. I mean, when I was in Delaware, all of a sudden I'm having conversations with the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the mayor on a regular basis. Under normal circumstances in PR, well, you don't get to talk to those folks. I mean, just no reason to. You're dealing with their PR people, but I'm actually talking to them, bank presidents, other heavy hitters there. So learning how to negotiate and manage any minefields that might be attached to that, political protocols, those kinds of things. Because one of the things I've also learned is when a public official shows up somewhere, whether they say it or not, they want to speak. They want to be heard. That's what they like to do. So understanding how they think and how they work helps you to translate that understanding and behavior to what you do for your clients.
Correct. That's true. Definitely a certain league. And so in you searching out to do even this podcast and trying to draw, it's probably not a big group of people who
it's not
manage. And I never really thought about it. I mean, I always knew it was an experience I valued. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's probably a pretty small club.
Well, even when I was looking at, I put the notice first in the PRSA open line, and I think the first first and only response initially I got was initially from Norris's office, and then I got something from you. Somebody called and offered somebody else, but trying to catch up with those people, and I just didn't have a lot of time to try to track people down, because I mean we've all had this kind of experience, and it's not something that you're going to get in graduate school. I mean, when you have to understand policies and explain policies to the media, you have to know what you're talking about. You also have to understand the pros and cons about that. The other thing in a campaign is you also have to understand the pros and cons of the competition's policies and agenda, so that if there's some issues there, that you can respond to those as well.
Yeah, opposition research. I forgot opposition research. This is where I learned it. Not so much with Speaker Gingrich's campaign. It was before that when I worked on 2 House of Representatives congressional campaigns that I probably honed my opposition research skills, and not only their policies, but what they were saying about the policies, which can be a little bit differently, and how they're speaking about the policies and who they're speaking to. It's almost like it depends on who you're speaking to, how you speak, and what you say. So much of politics is that way, right? So it makes it, you have to stay on your game the entire time. You have to be watching and listening, and other people bringing you things, watching and listening constantly, so that you can always respond and address appropriately.
Well, the other thing I'll say, maybe sort of in closing here, is that, yes, you do need to respond to people, and you need to be careful as to how you respond, simply because we've all seen where somebody tripped up because they thought they were in a private meeting, but somebody had their phone on that both recorded the audio and the video of it, so you can't explain that wasn't me, because no, we can see you now. So you need to be careful about how you say what it is you need to say. Unless you're out in the middle of a field somewhere or something along those lines. So, this has been a great conversation. And, Norris, you have any closing remarks?
Well, just never say anything that you don't want broadcast wide and far, even in private. So, and I think, the first president of the United States wrote a book, and it was entitled On Civility. And in that book, President Washington said you should never denigrate your opponents or your competition. And he always followed that, and he always remained respectful even of those who opposed him. And he was the most successful politician in American history. But today we have a politics and a president that has written a book, and The Art of the Deal is President Trump's book. And in that book it says it's okay to denigrate your competition. It's perfectly okay. So that's a different set of rules that we've come to now in political communications. But I believe that the most successful politician was Washington and Lincoln, and right up through to the present day, we've had people that have remained civil and respectful of one another, even though they're in opposing parties. And I think that's something we need to come back to in our communications.
Well, I think, and it shows, because at least with the 3 current, with Clinton and George W. and Obama, you see those 3 together at certain events. And I know that Bill Clinton and Bush have hit it off well. Just a lot of things like that. It does show that civility does pay.
It does. And like Norris said, so much of this is credibility and respect. And as professionals in this field, we have to remember that these projects and campaigns, they have an end date. And so it's really remembering who you want to be known as a communicator, and what are your ethics, and how do you want to be respected. And I hear people say all the time in the media about President Trump. President Trump will not be the president forever. And already you see people who've worked on his communications come and go. And so it's really incumbent upon all of us as professionals to decide how we want to be respected, how we want to be viewed in our field beyond the project of today.
Well, look, let me thank both of you, Adrienne Grimes and Norris Clark, for taking the time from your busy schedules to join us today here on the Public Relations Review podcast. And to all our listeners, if you've enjoyed the show, please, we'd like to get a review from you. And, of course, please join us again for the next edition of the Public Relations Review podcast.
This podcast is produced by Communication Strategies, an award-winning public relations and public affairs firm headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, this is Peter Woolfolk. First, let me say thank you so much for being a listener. Now, I want to alert you to our shiny new podcast website located at podpage.com. However, you can go directly to the podcast site located at publicrelationsreviewpodcast.com. There, you can contact me through email. You can leave a voice message. You can leave a review. You can read an episode blog and frequently learn about the podcast guests. You might also want to suggest podcast topic ideas or even suggest a guest. You can also let me know if you would like to receive our podcast listener logo that you can post on your social media. So I look forward to hearing from you about our new podcast website. Thank you so much for listening to the Public Relations Review podcast, and have a great day.